This is the Big Breakdown, a long look back at some of the biggest stories we're covering for you at the Hidden Killers podcast and True Crime Today. This is Hidden Killers with Tony Brueski.
They say justice is blind, but in Letcher County, Kentucky, it was shot dead in cold blood. September 19th of 2024 is what we're talking about, a Thursday morning like any other. Until it wasn't, inside the Letcher County Courthouse. What happened? Judge Kevin Mullins sat behind his desk going about his usual routine. Just before 10 a.m., Sheriff Sean Mickey Steins walked into his chambers and changed the course of history. Without warning, he pulled out a handgun and fired. The first shot was enough to put Mullins down. The next few were just to make sure. Surveillance cameras caught it all. No sound, just the cold, clinical footage of a man executing a sitting judge. And here's where things get strange. After making absolutely sure the judge was dead, Steins didn't flee. He didn't fight. He calmly walked to the nearest deputy, handed over his gun, and surrendered without a struggle, almost like he had just checked off an errand on his to-do list. Get up this morning, take the dogs out, drive the kids to school, shoot the judge, get arrested, spend my life in prison. The courthouse went into lockdown. People were screaming. Staff barricaded themselves in offices. Within minutes, law enforcement flooded the scene, not as Steins' backup, but to take their own sheriff into custody. Imagine the confusion in that building. When the man that you're hunting down, the man that you otherwise would be going to for help in a situation just like this, is the one causing the chaos. And just like that, the man elected to uphold the law became the county's most infamous murder suspect. He was initially charged with first-degree murder. The prosecution wasted absolutely no time on that, pushing for no bond, and the judge agreed. Steins, he wasn't going anywhere. There was no excuse that was going to come out that was going to make that change. He entered an initial plea of not guilty, setting the stage for one of the most bizarre legal battles in Kentucky ever. Because here's the thing. This wasn't just any murder. This was a sheriff killing a judge inside the courthouse, the place where law is supposed to reign supreme. You don't get much more high profile than that. And yet, from the moment Sheriff Steins turned himself in, one question lingered in the air. Why? Why did the sheriff shoot the judge? What is going on here? They were friends. At one time, they were actually family, like by in-law. It didn't take long for his attorney, Jeremy Bartley, to offer up a theory. Steins wasn't in his right mind. Okay, but why? At first, the defense hinted at an extreme emotional disturbance. The idea was that Steins had snapped in the moment. Something had pushed him over the edge. But as the weeks went on, Bartley changed tactics. This wasn't just about a bad temper or overwhelming stress. This was full-blown insanity. That's where we're at now. Enter California encephalitis, a rare neurological condition that Steins' legal team claims affected his brain function under extreme stress. Sounds like a mouthful, right? Basically, it's a viral brain infection that may cause confusion, memory issues, and in rare cases, aggression. It's a kind of thing that, if severe enough, could make someone lose control. That's the argument. But convincing a jury that Steins didn't know what he was doing, that's an entirely different battle. See, Kentucky's insanity defense law isn't easy to navigate. It follows a version of the McNaughton rule, which means Steins has to prove that at the time of the murder, he either, one, didn't understand what he was doing, or two, couldn't tell right from wrong. That's a high bar to clear. And juries don't like letting accused murderers off the hook. They're not good at that. In Kentucky, insanity defenses are about as rare as a unicorn sighting. Most people don't buy it, and they don't attempt it either. That's where the psychiatric experts come in. The defense will need professionals to argue that Steins was mentally incapacitated when he pulled the trigger. And you better believe the prosecution will have their own experts too, ones who will say he was fully aware and acted with intent. Because here's something to think about. If Steins was truly out of his mind, why did he calmly surrender? Why not flee? Why not resist? Those are the kind of questions that the prosecution is going to be hammering home. And the stakes, they're huge. If the insanity defense works, Steins won't be sent to prison. Instead, he'll be committed to a secure psychiatric facility where he'd remain until doors or doctors decide he's no longer a danger. That could mean life in a mental hospital, or it could mean an eventual release. If it fails, he's looking at a straight-up murder conviction, which in Kentucky means life in prison, possibly without parole, or worse, the death penalty if the prosecution chooses to seek it. So yeah, the case, it is just getting started. Now here's where things get even messier, because it's not as black and white as what we just talked about. You're thinking, why would a respected sheriff suddenly decide to execute a judge? It's a good question. Well, there is more to the story. A lot more to the story. 3 days before the shooting, Sean Steins sat for a deposition in a federal lawsuit. A lawsuit that tied directly back to Judge Kevin Mullins. This wasn't just any lawsuit. It was one that exposed a sex scandal inside Mullins' own courthouse. Kind of big stuff. If you're wondering how that fits into all of this, buckle up, because that's a whole different level of corruption that we may be talking about here. Kevin Mullins was the kind of judge who made you wonder whether the courtroom was a place of justice or just another extension of a small-town political boys' club. For years, he had been a fixture in Letcher County, wearing a black robe like a man who believed he owned the law rather than served it. His career followed the classic Appalachian power playbook. Local boy rises through the ranks, makes the right friends, wins the election, and suddenly he's the one calling the shots. Mullins had been on the bench long enough to build influence, but not long enough to be completely untouchable. On the surface, he played the role well, polished, respected. The kind of judge who knew everyone in town by name, who shook hands at football games, who could chat it up in a room full of lawyers and coal miners with equal ease. But just beneath that thin layer of professionalism, that's where the real story lived, allegedly. In a county where political alliances mean everything, Mullins had built his share of them. He was close with law enforcement, especially Sheriff Steins. The two had worked side by side for years, running the courthouse like their own little kingdom. If Mullins made a ruling that benefited Steins' department, nobody batted an eye. If Steins' deputies gave Mullins' courtroom extra attention, nobody questioned it. It was just how things are done. That's what we do here. And people knew better than to cross him. Mullins wasn't the kind of judge you wanted to challenge. If you were a lawyer, your cases might suddenly start going sideways. If you were a defendant, your sentence might get a little longer than expected. There were rumors. There are always rumors. But in Letcher County, what mattered wasn't whether they were true. It was whether you were willing to risk finding out. But in 2022, the cracks started to show. That was the year a federal lawsuit landed on Mullins' doorstep, one that threatened to pull back the curtain on his courtroom. And what it alleged was nothing short of a nuclear bomb. The lawsuit told a story that sounded more like something out of a crime show than real life. A female defendant caught up in a house arrest sentence claimed she had been sexually coerced inside Mullins' own chambers, not by the judge himself, but by a deputy working under his authority. Her testimony painted a grim picture. According to her, the deputy, who also served as Mullins' bailiff, made it clear that her freedom depended on one thing: her willingness to trade sex for special treatment. If she complied, she stayed out of jail. If she refused, she risked being thrown back behind bars on a technicality. And it wasn't just her. Another woman came forward with a similar story, claiming she had been manipulated into sexual favors in exchange for leniency. Both described the courthouse system that wasn't just broken, it was actively working against vulnerable people trapped inside it. And where was Mullins in all of this? That's the million-dollar question. The lawsuit didn't directly accuse the judge of participating in the abuse, but it didn't clear him either. It claimed that this was happening inside his own chambers, a place where he held absolute control. The victim said the deputy operated freely because he knew nobody was watching. No security cameras, no oversight, just the assumption that the powerful didn't get questioned. For his part, Mullins never publicly addressed the allegations before his death, but legally speaking, silence isn't the same as innocence. And the lawsuit didn't just go after the bailiff. It went after Sheriff Steins himself. According to the case, Steins either knew about the abuse and ignored it, or he was so incompetent that he let it happen right under his nose. Either way, it meant one thing: he was just as responsible. The lawsuit argued that Steins failed to properly train or supervise his deputies, creating an environment where coercion and abuse could thrive. It was a damning accusation and put both men, Mullins and Steins, under a microscope. But legal cases move slowly. And in small-town politics, the goal is always to outlast the scandal. You can survive the headlines, people will move on. Something else will come up to gate their attention. That might have been the plan. But then in September of 24, the deposition happened. 3 days before the shooting, Stein sat down for questioning in the lawsuit, and for several hours he had to answer for everything. We don't know exactly what was said. The transcript hasn't been made public, but what we do know is that whatever came up in that room, it was enough to shake the sheriff. Because that deposition, that was the first time Steins had to go on the record about the corruption allegations tied to his office. The first time he was forced to face details, the victims, the accusers, the choices that led him to that seat. And more importantly, it might have been the first time he had to speak about Mullins' role in all of it. Did Steins implicate the judge? Did he throw him under the bus to protect himself? Did he say something that he knew he couldn't take back? Those are the questions that loom over this case, because just 3 days later, Steins walked into Mullins' chambers and shot him dead. That's what makes this whole thing much bigger than a murder. It's not just about a sheriff losing control, it's about why he lost control. And the closer you look at that deposition, the more it starts to feel like a turning point. Maybe it was the moment. The moment Steins realized he was going down. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the moment he decided he wasn't going down alone. The legal system in Kentucky was never designed to handle a case like this. A sitting sheriff walks into a courthouse, guns down a judge, and now that same system, the one both men once controlled, is responsible for deciding what happens next? The conflict of interests are obvious from day one, but what are they going to do? Well, that's why the local judicial system had to step aside almost immediately. A special judge from outside the region has been assigned to oversee the trial, along with a special appointed circuit clerk. Every move is being scrutinized because nobody wants this case to be thrown out on a technicality. The last thing the state wants is an appeal based on claims that Steins didn't get a fair trial. But let's be real, what does a fair trial even look like in a case like this? Finding an impartial jury? Well, that's going to be a nightmare. This isn't just another crime story. It's Letcher County history. People here knew Judge Mullins. They knew Sheriff Steins. Some worked with them. Some owed them favors. Others had grudges. That alone makes it almost impossible to seat a jury that isn't walking in with some kind of bias. There's already talk of a change of venue, which means the trial could be moved to a different county to find jurors who weren't living under the weight of Mullins and Steins' political influence. But even then, the case has made national headlines. Any juror in Kentucky has likely already heard some version of the story. The real question is whether they can find 12 people who are willing to listen to the evidence instead of the rumors. And that's not the only hurdle here, because Steins' legal team is about to take a massive gamble. They want Mullins' alleged past dragged into the courtroom. Steins' defense is preparing to argue that Mullins' connection to the Courthouse sex scandal is directly relevant to why the murder happened. They want the jury to hear about the alleged abuse in his chambers, the lawsuit, the victims, the coercion, all of it. Their argument? That Steins, well, he was mentally unraveling under the weight of the deposition, and that Mullins wasn't just a victim, he was part of a larger corrupt system that had finally come crashing down on itself. Maybe he's the hero in this. Maybe this is vigilante justice. He took out a predator. Maybe. He still can't do that. The prosecution, on the other hand, is going to fight that with everything they have, because here's the reality. A murder trial isn't supposed to be about the victim's reputation, legally speaking. Whether Mullins was involved in the scandal or not does not change what happened on September 19th of 2024. Steins walked into the chambers, pulled the gun, fired multiple rounds. The judge will have to decide whether evidence about Mullins' misconduct is relevant or it's just a distraction. If they allow it, the trial could turn into a referendum on the courthouse corruption instead of a straight murder case. If they block it, the defense will argue that Steins' side of the story is being suppressed. Either way, it's going to be a legal fight that could shape the entire direction of the trial. And hanging all over this whole mess, the death penalty. So far, prosecutors haven't said whether they're going to seek it. It's not an automatic decision. Seeking the death penalty means a longer, more expensive trial and an extra phase of sentencing. And a jury has to be death qualified, which means anyone who is morally opposed to the death penalty is automatically excluded. So if you want to get out of jury duty and you know it's a death penalty case, just say that. Or that you listen to a lot of true crime. That kind of jury tends to favor the prosecution, which might be exactly why they might decide to go for it. But there's also politics involved. If they don't seek the death penalty, some in the community will see it as a weak move, like the system protecting its own. If they do go down it, it turns Steins into something bigger than just a defendant. He's become a man fighting for his life. And juries tend to hesitate when the ultimate punishment is on the table. The decision here will shape everything about how this trial plays out. The insanity defense is already a long shot, and if it fails, Steins' legal team is going to need backup plans. Because pleading not guilty is not going to cut it, especially when you're on camera doing it. One plausible fallback, diminished capacity. This isn't quite the same as insanity. It's more like arguing that Steins wasn't thinking clearly when he pulled the trigger. But he wasn't legally insane either. The goal here would be to push for a lesser charge, like manslaughter instead of murder. And if the defense can convince a jury that Steins acted under extreme emotional disturbance, the punishment could be reduced significantly. But let's be honest. The prosecution isn't going to let that argument slide without a fight. They're going to paint Steins as a calculated killer, a man who knew exactly what he was doing and had a reason for doing it. Their argument is straightforward. If Steins truly snapped, why did he bring a gun into the courthouse? Well, because he's the sheriff. Why did he immediately surrender instead of running or resisting? And that looks a lot more like a planned execution than a temporary mental breakdown. That's exactly what the jury is going to have to decide. If the insanity plea doesn't work, the jury doesn't buy the diminished capacity argument, Steins is looking at the full weight of a murder conviction. That could mean life without parole, or if prosecutors do go for it, a death sentence. There's also the possibility of a plea deal, but don't expect Steins to take one unless the offer is significantly better than the risk of trial. Given the brutality of the crime and the public outrage, prosecutors aren't likely to offer much leniency. The reality is this case is going to trial, and it's going to be one hell of a fight. But this isn't just about Steins anymore, because when you take a step back, this case isn't just about one murder, it's about an entire system that let this happen. For years, Mullins and Steins ran the courthouse like their own personal empire. The power structure in Letcher County, it protected them, insulated them, let them get away with things that, should have raised some alarms a long time ago. When that system finally started to collapse, it collapsed in the most violent way possible. The real question is, what else is going to come out before this trial is over? Because if this case exposes more corruption, more abuses, more unchecked power, this might not just be about the judge and one sheriff. This might just be about the beginning of a much, much bigger case against many, many officials in that county. There's a lot more to this. Eric Faddis, defense attorney, former prosecutor, joining us to discuss the new elements of this case. The extreme emotional disturbance argument, that was initially what was talked about. Now we're going flat out to full insanity. Is this going to hold up with the potential underlying motives that aren't being openly talked about yet? Could Steins' actions be linked to the courthouse scandal? And if so, could that complicate this whole mental health defense that they're talking about?
I think it absolutely could compromise that defense because, part of an insanity defense is saying, I didn't know right from wrong. But what it seems like is that Sheriff Steins knew something very wrong was happening, and he took what he thought was righteous action in order to stop that. That's kind of the definition of knowing right and wrong, at least in one's own mind. And then this extreme emotional disturbance thing, that's kind of gone by the wayside. That's usually not its own defense. And courts often don't even allow that in terms of trying to disprove charges. And so I think defense is going to have some problems with this one.
A lot of people are looking at this as, I think we want to believe there's a hero in a case that involves accusations of sexual assault. You want to believe somebody's did something for the right reasons. I mean, it's never right to just go shoot somebody. But, one could see it being justified, especially with a phone call, especially with his daughters being called right before this occurred. That is all such weird elements of this case. And we just don't know the answer to those questions as of yet. But could this be, not so up and up, where maybe he's not the hero that everybody kind of wants him to be? He was pretty tight with the judge. He did do that deposition just days before. There could be a very real chance that he's implicated in the charges against the judge that were out there, that he had something to do with it. I mean, we're talking about his deputy that is accused of the assault in the chambers, and that he didn't discipline, didn't train properly, didn't monitor this situation enough, and allowed it basically to happen on his watch. It makes me wonder if there's something here where, did he kill the judge because the judge was going to expose him further?
There is some ominous revelations that are coming out, and they're all allegations. This case is very early on, and we don't know exactly what occurred. But if this judge was involved in some sort of sex for leniency prospect. And the sheriff also had some involvement. Certainly that is damning information no one would want the public to receive. And it's not unprecedented for an affiliate or someone involved in some web like what could have been going on to try to silence other folks so that they're protecting, their own butt.
I mean, these are two completely separate cases. At least they were. Until all of this went down. There was the case that was pointing at the judge, but Steins is part of it. And then there's this, which happened and started 3 days after that deposition. Are we going to see things merge here together? Are we going to see the federal case where they're looking at the judge? I mean, is there discovery to be found over there that could help understand or explain what happened? Or are these two really still separate entities that don't have a lot to do with one another? Or would we ever find out, because we're talking about court cases, filings, things that are going to be under seal and such?
In the criminal context, there's a concept called res gestae. And essentially what it means is that generally speaking, the jury is entitled to hear the background, the context, if it helps inform their understanding of the specific allegations. And so I think surely this outside information that may have contributed to the alleged crime is relevant. I think a jury's going to hear about it. And I think that the cases are going to pick from one another in terms of getting helpful information from the civil side, bringing on witnesses from the criminal side into the civil case. Those things are going to begin to mesh, in my opinion.
Insanity being the new thing that's being brought up here. I mean, we don't know if that will be allowed into court to be argued. The prosecution is conducting their own psychiatric evaluation. What are they going to need to prove in order to bring that into court?
Really, a pillar of insanity is that the defendant could not tell right from wrong due to some mental disease or defect. So that predicate mental health piece has to be established, and it's established through those evaluations you just mentioned. Now, usually what happens, the prosecutor does an evaluation and says, this guy's fine. There's no mental health disease, or there's no mental disease or defect. Then the defense does their own, and the defense expert says, oh, yes, there is. And then usually that is enough to meet the threshold, so long as you have one expert saying there is a mental disease or defect that contributed to the person's inability to understand right from wrong.
Would you have to show a pattern of that to be valid? That there was other issues in the past, not just suddenly out of nowhere he snaps and kills this guy? I mean, if you're truly, insane, if you have, if you're suffering from, if you're a psychopath, if you're a sociopath, that's not just something like, boom, it comes on. It's there for a long period of time. Is that going to be a really hard one to argue, you think?
I think so. Something you're touching on is this sort of colloquial notion of temporary insanity. And I get so many clients who come to me and they're like, hey, what about temporary insanity? That's not really a thing in most courts. Usually with insanity, like you said, there has to be some buildup. There has to be some psychological vulnerability to completely snapping and losing your cool. It's usually not just someone who has been reasonably fine, psychologically intact for their entire lives. Then something bad happens and they act out. That's not a defense, and that's not insanity.
No, it's not. Let's play the other side of this, though. What if he did find out something really horrible and shocking? Let's say that there is a lot of legitimacy to the accusations about the judge's chambers basically being used as a brothel, and, the sheriff's like shocked by this. Again, as close as they were, I don't know how he would be shocked by this, but let's say he's shocked by this. And let's say he finds out in some way, shape, or form his daughter or a friend or somebody close to him, young, has been victimized by this said brothel. If you're a parent and you're getting that information and you have a weapon on you and the person who's alleged to be doing these things, or you find out that, maybe they are, one could understand. One would pull a weapon and shoot the other. Is that insanity? Or is that, what would that be looked at if in fact it goes that way?
Yes, so it's still within the mental health realm, but it's likely not insanity. It's much more likely what's called heat of passion. And so heat of passion is usually when a person receives such overly distressing information that a reasonable person could not have contained themselves, that they would have it would have been irresistible impulse for them to act out. That's more heat of passion. The thing about heat of passion, though, is it's not a complete defense. It doesn't result in a person being found not guilty. It can lessen the severity of the charge, lessen the severity of the penalty, but it's not a complete out for Sheriff Steins.
Does Steins' willingness to surrender in this case, like right after it happened, he just walks out, puts a gun down, arrest me. That doesn't seem to me, at least, and I'm not a psychologist, but it doesn't seem to be how an insane person would be functioning. If you're out of control and you shot him, and you would think you'd be running, not like, well, here you go, I'm done. Or maybe that is insane. Maybe it is insane to go, here, take me.
Yeah, I hear you. I would expect perhaps someone who is actually insane to run out and rip off all their clothes and saying aliens are eating my brain or something like that.
Yeah.
But when we have with the action that Sheriff Stein took, it seemed like he kind of knows what he did. He knows at least the legal wrongfulness of his alleged conduct, and he's willing to kind of surrender to that, in part because he's in law enforcement and is taught to be cooperative in that context. And so that seems a lot more like someone who knows what they were doing and is going through the motions that they kind of expect to be going through after that.
I'm just going to throw this out there because we've seen it in other cases where there's a member of law enforcement that is in question, and there's obviously more than one person in law enforcement in a community, at least in most. And there certainly is here, albeit a small community. If there's others that were involved in this alleged, brothel thing that's going on, we already have one of the people under the sheriff here that's, been, taken away for it. One might think there might be more people involved. Who's investigating this? Who's looking into this? Because if you start digging into the evidence and you start looking at discovery and you start looking at the text messages and the phone calls and the communications in general over all of this stuff, there might be some people who don't want their name intermingled with it, that have nothing to do with the murder, but more so over here on the sex side. I would be a little bit concerned about getting the full picture of evidence in this. If there's other names that I don't want to be mixed up in this, even though I am, because you just kind of be exposed by default, would you not?
Yeah, Tony, that is a very real concern. Look, the sheriff's office for which Sheriff Steins works should not be investigating itself. That there's just too much of a likelihood of bias in favor of the suspect with whom they work. They know them. They might have gone to dinner with their family, stuff like that. And so usually what happens is an outside law enforcement entity should be appointed to do the investigation, an entity that is impartial, that is unbiased, that doesn't know Sheriff Steins, and that has less of a likelihood of compromising the investigation and giving someone favor when they shouldn't. And so that is what should happen. And in fact, a special prosecutor outside of the jurisdiction should also be assigned to oversee that investigation. And
I know we have that. I know there's a special prosecutor. I know there's a judge that's going to be seeing this from out of the jurisdiction. It's just that and I don't know the answer to that. So I'm not accusing anyone of that. It's just something that comes to mind when we see a case like this, because we've seen other law enforcement agencies cover up for themselves, that people have nothing to do with the case. They just don't want their names getting out there and their skeletons to come out of the closet, which would inevitably be when you shake the snow globe around, there they go too. I don't know. It makes me wonder. I'm not accusing anyone, but it's certainly something that I think an eye should be placed on when we see what comes out here. Because I'm sure there's going to be a lot that is going to be revealed in this community that not a lot of people are going to want to. Siobhan Scott, psychotherapist and author, joining us from a clinical standpoint. What does it take for someone to reach a psychological breaking point like this and commit such an extreme act? And do these extreme emotional responses happen instantly, or is this something that, maybe built up over time a bit in a case like this?
Boy, this is a guy I would love to sit down and talk to and get a sense for him. It's so hard to know. Extreme emotional disturbance, which is what they're claiming here, isn't a clinical diagnosis. You don't find it in our diagnostic manual. So it's a legal term that you find in just a handful of states. Not all states even use it. Apparently they do there. So what does it mean? Usually it's alluding to the kind of event, the thing that's always referenced is walking in on your wife in bed with another man and picking up a gun and shooting him because you're just so upset. So it implies that you're not mentally ill, you're just a regular person, but you're so distraught by something that any of us can relate to that you lose control in that situation. So it implies that it's not premeditated. But when they throw in insanity, that would imply something completely different, that there is a pre-existing mental health condition of some sort. We hear no evidence about that. So unless there's a lot of, other things that are just not being discussed at this point, it's really hard to say.
And there's so much of this case that we don't know about yet. We don't know what was on that phone. We don't know why he said they're going to get my family, why his daughter was called right before this took place, what happened in that deposition. There's so many unknowns. But to go to insanity, that seems like a bit of a leap just from the extreme emotional angle of this. Wouldn't you have to show like a pattern of behavior? Can insanity just come on? Are there moments that can truly be looked at like this, or is it something it's kind of a gradual build or just kind of a continuum?
Most of the time it's a gradual build and a continuum, although there can be incidents of a psychotic condition could be related to a medication. Certainly, we know that people who use meth can have abrupt psychotic breaks with bizarre delusions. The sheriff doesn't strike me as a meth user, though. But was there something else, something in the environment that triggered a psychotic break and he became aggressive and violent? That's always possible, but we haven't heard any evidence of that. And it seems like it would have been something other people were noticing as well, at least, within a few hours of this murder.
Yeah, the fact that he's a sheriff and he's, executing his job, I'm not trying to make a pun there, but he's doing his job, as normal up until this point. I don't know where you're going to go with that. The assumption that I think has been made so often, and we don't know the answer to this, is that maybe he's a hero in a weird vigilante sort of way. Maybe he found out information and he was stopping this monster from continuing and taking the law into his own hands. I tend to wonder, honestly, more the fact that he's been operating with this judge for many years. They are very good friends. They were even family at one point through marriage. That he probably had some inkling of what was going on over here. And if you're the sheriff and you're letting that sort of stuff go on, that's not a good thing. I'm almost wondering if there was, and this is just my conjecture, I'm wondering if he found out something in that deposition based on the questions that were asked, that the judge was going to have something on him and that it was going to turn on the sheriff in a very horrible way. And the only thing you can do to stop that is eliminating the judge. That seems to be almost a little more logical in my mind. I know it's more glass half empty, but considering the circumstances, what's your thought?
Yeah, it's certainly a possibility. We can take it in a variety of directions. And again, if there was something that he was trying to expose, something horrendous about the judge going on, one would think there were a lot of other options rather than just pulling out the gun and shooting him like that, which of course has only ruined his own life as well. So it's weird.
Yeah, and that's where, the insanity comes in, or the extreme emotional distress. That's like, okay, well, I guess if you're facing that and all of your skeletons are coming to light, you might not be in the best mental space, which, maybe I guess could drive someone to that sort of feeling of, like you made the example of the husband walking in on the wife cheating on him. I mean, what would that defense be like? I mean, how would you bring that up into a case like this? Because again, you have to assume that then the other parts of the other case are going to be put in here, and some of those blanks will be filled in, and we don't know if they will. Other than just saying he found out something really horrible and shocking, and this is how he reacted.
Yeah, I think that kind of a defense, you would be hoping for compassion from the jury to obtain a lesser charge, and certainly to mitigate in the penalty phase if he were convicted. So it's just to build empathy that, look, that could have been any one of us. If we heard that kind of disturbing information, that we would react that way.
The fact that he surrendered without resistance right after this happened, he walks out into, the lobby area, puts his gun away on the counter, gives it to them, and basically says, "Arrest me right now." That doesn't sound like an insane person, or maybe that is completely insane. Maybe he should have run, But it seems fairly calculated.
Yeah. It seems like somebody who's grounded in reality and knows the penalty for what he just did, and knows it's wrong, and had a target for whatever his reasons were, had a specific target. He wasn't just out randomly shooting people. So it does not really sound like someone who was so out of their mind that they didn't know what they were doing and didn't know that it was wrong.
The fact that this was a small department, and this is going to be just kind of opinion and conjecture here. This is a very small department. There's only so many people in it. It was a deputy under Steins that the part of the sexual allegations were about, was that he was taking people into the judge's chamber, and basically it was, you give me sex and you won't have to be in jail, basically. That was a deputy under him. And part of the argument here was that, well, Mr. Steins, you're above this person. Why didn't you train these people better? How is this going on underneath your nose and watch? It does make me wonder how many other folks in this department may know about this, or be involved in this. And I'm not saying that for sure. I'm not going to say any names because I have no idea. But the fact that this seems to be so kind of out in the open to a certain extent, you're using the judge's chamber. There's got 3 people here who seem to have some knowledge of this stuff going on. And they're investigating this. There may be some incentive not for the full story to come about, because there may be other people implicated in the sex stuff, nothing to do with the murder. And that may be some incentive not to, look in certain holes, I would think. I would think that the investigation on this is going to have to be looked at really with a fine-tooth comb.
Yeah, definitely, because it's hard to imagine that other people were absolutely clueless about it. I agree.
No, it is a mess. We'll see where this all goes.
The world of true crime never stops, and neither do we. Press subscribe now to get daily updates, in-depth analysis, and expert opinions from the Hidden Killers podcast and True Crime Today. This is Murder in the Morning with Tony Brueski and Stacey Cole.
Despite a video showing what appears to be a cold-blooded murder, we're talking about the sheriff and the judge here today. The attorney in this case that is representing former Sheriff Sean Mickey Steins insists there is more to the case than meets the eye. I'm hoping there is, because this is kind of insane. On September 19th, 2024, in a quiet courthouse in Letcher County, Kentucky, Steins allegedly walked into the chambers of District Judge Kevin Mullins and shot him multiple times. The entire incident was captured on surveillance footage, and the images are as damning as they come. Mullins, caught off guard, scrambling to take cover under his desk, while Steins keeps firing. According to defense attorney Jeremy Bartley, what happened in that office wasn't just the result of a single moment, but years of tension, legal battles, and alleged threats. It's extremely complicated, Bartley told Court TV's Vinnie Politan, pushing back on the apparent opened and shut nature of the case. This isn't just about what's seen on the video. That's a bigger story here. At the time of his murder, Mullins was a key figure in a lawsuit involving allegations of sexual misconduct against a deputy who worked in the courthouse. The lawsuit accused former Deputy Ben Fields of coercing women on house arrest into sexual favors, with at least one incident allegedly taking place inside Mullins' own chambers.
Ugh.
While Steins wasn't named as a defendant in the suit, he was questioned under oath just days before the shooting. In the week prior to and the week of deposition, lots of people noticed that Mickey had become more and more increasingly paranoid, that he became sleepless, had gone nights without sleep, and there was an overwhelming amount of pressure on him, Bartley said, painting a picture of a man under immense psychological strain. The deposition, combined with what Bartley described as a number of people very interested in the outcome, had allegedly put Steins in a heightened state of distress. Attorney Ned Pilsdorf, who represents the plaintiff in the lawsuit, recalls Steins' deposition as being out of the ordinary. It was not your typical deposition of a sheriff in a civil rights case, Pilsdorf said, describing Steins' behavior as odd, but stopping short of speculating on how the lawsuit might connect to the murder. But having said that, I have no idea why his defense attorney keeps saying that my litigation, the litigation me and my co-counsel are involved in, was somehow a motive in all of this. But he keeps saying that. Steins' attorney claims his client truly believed his family was in immediate danger at the time of the shooting. Was the threat as imminent as he perceived it to be? Maybe not, Bartley admitted, but there was an objective threat to his family. That's a major claim, one that raises many questions as answers. If Steins was in fact paranoid and sleep-deprived leading up to the shooting, how much of his fear was rooted in reality? What exactly did he think Mullins, or anyone else for that matter, was planning to do to him? In early March of 25, Bartley filed paperwork indicating that Steins will pursue an insanity defense, arguing that his client was in an extreme emotional state at the time of the shooting. The move isn't just a legal strategy, it's also practical. He wanted to get Mickey on the calendar for an evaluation, Bartley said, explaining that Kentucky's backlog means psychological evaluations are currently running at 12 to 18 months behind.
Oh, that works well when you've got somebody in crisis. Doesn't it?
It's a fucking joke.
Man, I thought I was pissed off that I'd have to wait 6 months to get into a dermatologist. I guess I should settle the fuck down, shouldn't I?
Oh, I love it. I love how we don't value mental health in our country. It's just lovely, even though it's like the basis for everything we do and talk about.
Yep.
As the case heads to trial, the legal battle will center not on whether Steins pulled the trigger. The part is very indisputable. He did. But on why he did it. Was he as the video suggests, executing a judge in cold blood? Or was he a man consumed by fear and paranoia, reacting to a perceived threat that only he could see? One thing's clear, Letcher County lost a judge, a sheriff, and any lingering sense of normalcy in a single shocking afternoon. Or was he being a vigilante? Did he know something about the judge? I don't know, considering there was basically a brothel being run out of his chambers. So maybe there's that. Or is the sheriff here involved in something? Was he involved in some of this sexual shit that was going on in the background? Basically, you do this for me, I'll do this for you. Coercing women into having sex for favors. Or freedom, in this case.
I really want to believe that he's the hero in this story.
I
really, really want to. I want to believe that he saw somebody doing something he didn't approve of and took justice into his own hands, which I don't ever think is acceptable, but that's what my brain wants to believe.
I think it'd be a lovely story. Is it reality in this case? I don't know. Could be. But I don't know. The stuff that was going on allegedly in this circle, in the courthouse with the other, it was the deputy or whatever he was that they did the deposition on, with the judge. Who knew what about what? I mean, it seems like this ecosystem kind of had some of this stuff going on in it for a long period of time. And that's what makes me wonder is, I've been imagining if you're the sheriff and you're pretty tight with a judge, which it seemed they were prior to this, you probably got a little knowledge of what the hell's going on around here. And if you were not immediately, or you did not immediately do something about it the first time you found out about it, tells me you're kind of complicit or maybe participating.
Yeah. Well,
I don't know.
At the very least, you didn't stop it.
You didn't stop it, and you're in a position of power to do so. Again, these are all just speculation and questions of what the hell is happening here. But I don't know that anybody is going to walk away from this looking rosy. Anybody in any of the judge, the sheriff, I don't know what the hell the family connection is about. The only thing I could think of, and again, this is just from my brain, I don't know, there's nothing to this other than me speculating, is, okay, where would a logical threat come from to his family? And why?
Right.
Any
I
thoughts?
want to know what happened at lunch.
Well, I mean, try and answer that once. Like, where do you think, why would there be a threat against the sheriff? And who would be making the threat? Any thoughts?
No, in my brain, no, because I guess where my head goes is, was there something with the daughter?
Yeah.
Was there something? I lost track of your question. Ask me the question again. Tell me what.
Who would have a reason to make a threat against the family of the sheriff, and why?
Had to be something that somebody found out, wouldn't it? Some piece of knowledge that was never meant to be discovered.
Yeah. My mind goes to a very disgruntled father or husband or boyfriend of someone who found out that someone was coerced into sex in exchange for freedom or whatever it may be, that you shouldn't be having to have sex to get in a legal setting.
Right.
And somehow knew, again, this is just 1000% pure speculation, and somehow had knowledge that the sheriff was involved in this in some way, shape, or form, or allowed it to happen, or didn't do anything about it, or whatever. And that person is so pissed off, and they're trying to find a way of retribution here. And they're like, you're okay with this happening to my family? You better watch out for your family, because I'm coming for them.
It's very possible.
And then
you've
creates
got Papa Bear upset.
Yeah, and then you got the paranoia. You got, so he's fearing multiple things at once. He's fearing what his accountability is going to be in this other case. So he knows if he's involved in any of this stuff, he's going to be exposed at some point, and that's going to destroy his life and his family. And number two, there's a threat out on his family from someone involved in that. That's, I don't know. That's again, there's no proof of anything like that. That is 1000% my speculation on how these cards may fall and how the Legos may be put together.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I have nothing to base it on other than just pure speculation and trying to put the dots together in some way that makes sense psychologically. Or he lost his mind. Maybe there's something else completely going on in his mind that he is so distracted about and he's so paranoid about. Maybe there was a mental break. Maybe he started believing someone was going after his family and there was some sort of conspiracy out, to get him within the department. Or he was somewhat involved in something and nobody knew about it yet. And then that just led to paranoia and eventual insanity. And, started having delusions about the judge and things of that nature. There's a lot of things that could have been going on here.
Yeah, and the psychosis that set in. So why was he not sleeping? Why was he...
Yeah, what's a trigger?
Yeah, what disturbed him so much that he started spiraling out of control?
Well, the fact that he started it sounds like, he started acting like this when he did the deposition. Or pretty close to, or knowing he had to give a deposition, and after he did the deposition is when it seems the behavior got weird. So that's why I think people are connecting it to the actual deposition, because what other event had happened? I mean, there could be something we just don't know about in his life that, is very tight to the vest, maybe. But you think of horrible things in your life that at the end of the day, you're going to look back on and go, yeah, that was horrible. And you will never forget. I would think this could be one of them, being, brought in really close to having one of your deputies who's doing this. And there's allegations of this being a brothel. And if you are somewhat involved in it or are just finding out the information even, I think could very much disturb you, because it would, if you have nothing to do with it, it would rock your world of, it would completely blow up everything you view as being normal and healthy in your community. Or if you found out that someone in your world, daughter maybe, was, somehow, taken advantage of or abused in this situation. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of things there. I think some things may look bigger than they actually are, and some things that aren't are bigger than they actually are.
This is going to be such an interesting case. I don't see a lot of dates on when things are going to start happening, but boy, I'm chomping at the bit to get the info. Give us a nugget, give us something.
I feel like this is another one of these cases where, we've seen so many where the checks and balances within police departments, within government agencies, within small jurisdictions, even large jurisdictions. If there's no checks and balances, or the checks and balances are all corrupt, anything can happen. You can get away with anything. And if you're able to do it for so long until some hiccup happens, you just get complacent and you get comfortable with it, because that's the way they've always done things. Look at the accusations that have come out, like in the Karen Reed case and the Sandra Birchmore case, and the corruption over there that is clearly has happened with some of the officers. Look at Delphi. There's so many of these smaller town jurisdictions that everybody, they're all in the same boat together, where they really should be independent agencies that do check and balance each other. Obviously you're on the side of the state, but you're also in the interest of the truth. And if you don't have to put somebody away and you don't have to go after somebody because something exonerates them, then bring it out. But if you're in this thing where we're just going to run this the way we want, and hey, if we can take advantage of women, because it's all mainly men that are here, so-and-so did it a while ago, or so-and-so is still doing that. Oh, maybe this is how we do it. I guess it's one of the fringe benefits if you're a real shitty thinking human being and you're like, okay, yeah. And then you just keep bringing in shitty people that go along with it, and it just it becomes the culture rather than, the horrible shock that it should be if somebody's acting this far out of turn.
An ugly situation.
It's going to be very interesting, and I don't think we know much yet.
Craving non-stop true crime updates? Press subscribe now and get the latest cases, analysis, and expert commentary delivered straight to your feed, only from the Hidden Killers podcast and True Crime Today.